it's a particular pleasure for me to welcome Mayor John Robert Smith, who served with distinction as mayor of Meridian, Mississippi for several terms, and who's certainly well regarded around the nation as an expert in the area of intermodal transportation, highways and rail. You know, states have different ways of suballocating their highway money. So let me, Mayor Smith, let me ask you about that in a couple of ways. I'm told Indiana, for example, suballocates a large portion of their surface transportation funds. In Maryland, a large portion is suballocated to the Baltimore-Annapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. We don't do that in Mississippi, as you know, Mr. Mayor. And this means that city and county officials basically have had little to no involvement in developing a state transportation plan. So let me ask you first of all, Mr. Smith, MAP 21 made a number of changes to the way highway maintenance funding goes out the door. As a former mayor, could you enlighten us, how have these changes impacted the way local governments, cities and counties, participate in transportation planning?
Yes, sir, Senator Wicker, and thank you for the kind things you said. It was always a pleasure to work with you in your office while I was serving as mayor of Meridian. MAP 21 consolidated a number of the programs that local units of government could access for funds. And as they were consolidated, local units of government lost that ability to access those funds. Also, MAP 21 reduced the percentage of funds suballocated to local units of government. And then thirdly, and they added responsibilities which then must be covered by those local units of government. In the TAP program, for example, which was one so successfully used by local units of government, 50% of that money was taken, and state DOTs are allowed to flex that for their use rather than even allow communities to compete for it. So all of those things taken together collectively have greatly reduced local units of government access to any federal transportation dollars to try to solve the transportation needs that they hear about from their local citizens every day.
Well, thank you for that. Are you aware, Mr. Smith, of my amendment with my colleague, Senator Booker of New Jersey? We actually had the markup of the highway reauthorization today. Senator Booker and I did not offer the amendment. We discussed it and, of course, reserved the right to offer it on the floor after it's been refined, perhaps so as to gain the support of the leadership of the committee. But it was interesting to me to hear a Democratic member of the United States Senate from the Northeast saying the very sorts of things that a Republican member from the Southeast would say about the wisdom of local government and people being closer, the officials that are closer to the people knowing the needs better. It was kind of refreshing to see that bit of agreement there. Our amendment would carve out a portion of the money set aside for projects of regional and national significance and create a discretionary competitive program within each state. Could you give us some thoughts about that, if you don't mind?
Yes, sir. We absolutely support your push for an in-state competitive grant program that our local units of governments, MPOs, can compete for the funding of the very issue that was not fully addressed in MAP 21. So I thank you for that. I thank Senator Booker for that. And the fact that it's true in New Jersey and true in Mississippi tells me it's pretty universal across the country. And it's an issue that you have the opportunity to address here. I think the fact that you not only create the funding, allow the local units of government to compete for it, but you also set up a panel that assures the fairest process possible.
Absolutely.
So that the best projects will move forward, so that you get the most innovation, you get the most transparency, and you assure that those federal dollars have the greatest return on investment. And it will give my colleagues here at the table another funding source to meet the needs that their residents are pushing them for. And we discussed before you came in about the polar generations in our cities, and it's true in Mississippi just as it is in Kansas City or in Connecticut, that we local electeds have to prepare ourselves to address those coming needs. And your amendment, which I hope will be offered, and I hope working with the leadership, they will understand the wisdom and that they will hear the voices of this nation's local elected leaders, and will include that in the Transportation Authorization Bill. You're absolutely correct.
Mr. Chair, if I might just ask one other line of question.
Absolutely.
Mayor Smith, have you had an opportunity to tell the committee your long-term involvement in the Amtrak system?
I've mentioned it briefly, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Well, let me just ask you, and I appreciate what you've done as the mayor of a medium-sized city in Mississippi to work for a truly national passenger rail network. We have a lot of talk about the need for Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, which benefits those of us that work up here in the Northeast. But how important are Amtrak's long-distance networks to the cities and towns along those routes? And are there any changes we should look at in that regard that could free up funds for railroads across our nation?
Yes, sir. The Northeast corridor is very important to this region and to the country. But it's not the only important corridor. And to focus on one corridor as being the only important one would be like focusing on one interstate highway is the only important one. We understand that in the highway system, you have interstate highways, state highways, county, city roads, and streets that connect together to form a system. We understand the holistic system of highways. Well, we need to have that same understanding of a holistic connected system of passenger rail. We're not looking for high-speed rail in Mississippi right now, but we are looking for some rail, and we're looking for maintaining that national system. Very important to our people, very important to access, very important to economic development that you've seen in the downtown in Meridian after the investment in that transportation center there. We're seeing it in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We've seen it in Jackson, Mississippi. You will see it along the coast again if we get rail back there. To be on a transportation spine is critically important to economic development for a community. And in a state like ours, where you see that we're losing intercity bus, which we're losing all across this country, and we're threatened with the loss of essential air service, do you tell your citizens that you only have one choice to move about, and that's the private automobile? I think, again, when you look at an aging population in the millennial generation, they're not making those choices. And if we want them in Mississippi, creating their lives, spending their money, then we better have the tools to adapt to that. And the National Passenger Rail System is a part. So it needs to be looked at what is the best form of passenger rail that meets the needs of the states that it serves. And I would call your attention to the coastal South, which I know you hear from the cities in coastal Mississippi. Katrina occurred, wiped out service east of New Orleans. The cities and the people there did nothing to lose that service. It was a horrific storm, but they don't have the service back. And you look at that card of cities from New Orleans through Gulfport, Biloxi to Mobile over into Florida, and why is that thriving corridor not connected by rail? I think that's a disservice to the people of the coastal South.
Thank you, sir.